Hello, come on in. Welcome to Studio M at Remote Control Productions, otherwise known as my studio. I'm Alan Meyerson. Very nice to meet you. This is my co-pilot, Monty Meyerson. I don't do a mix without him. And this is Studio M, so come on in. So we're excited here because we've just installed our brand new Avid S6, which is the latest in kind of mixing technology. It's a huge controller, no longer passes any audio, but what it does do is it enables me to take massive sessions, for example, the one I'm working on now, which has about 600 tracks in it. Right there, we have one passive orchestra, two passes of orchestra, three passes of orchestra, and there's two other passes. Then we get into passes of percussion. And it enables me to, when you have a session of this size, to easily be able to get around and to be able to look at any group of faders at any time by hitting a button, and the whole thing spills out. It's changed my workflow completely. It's really, really flexible and fun to work with. So, you know, this is sort of the basis of what I'm doing now, and I use ATC speakers, ATC 100s, with 3 subwoofers. I use one subwoofer, which sort of extends the bass frequencies of just the main monitoring system, although you would think they would be big enough the way they are. I actually wanted more. And then for film mixing, I use 2 more subwoofers for just low frequency effects and things I just want to send theatrically to a subwoofer in a theater. And then in the surrounds, I'm still using B&W surrounds, which is unusual, but that's something that I have to eventually change, is get it all matching ATCs. So this is all brand new, but it's the world I've been working in for quite a while. I'm still a little bit of a hybrid analog digital guy. For example, all of my orchestral stuff, I still pump through my Manley EQs, even though I have plug-in versions of them, which sound really, really great. There's still something about the sound of these that is really special, something I haven't been able to quite capture. Really, all I'm doing with them is, in this particular case, I'm just adding a tiny bit of warmth, but really all I'm doing is trying to hit the tube and excite everything a little bit. Just add a little bit more kind of harmonic content to stuff that's very well recorded, but it's recorded digitally, and still there's something about this. It could just be the randomness of it, the fact that the tubes may not 100% match left to right, whatever it is, it just creates more depth, and it's a little bit more exciting sound for me. And then the other place I still use analog is when I do my stereo soundtrack albums from the surround mixes that I do. I mix down to stereo inside of Pro Tools, but then I pump it out and I go into this chain. I go from the first place I go in is my Manley Varimu EQ with the T-bar mod and the high frequency sidechain mod. And that thing sounds great. And the reason, and I just use a tiny bit of compression, really just 1 or 2 dB of compression. You see, it's a pretty odd setting. I'm sort of keeping my gain way down on it because I don't want to hit it too hard, and I don't want to add too much limiting. When I do a soundtrack album, there's plenty of places that this thing's going to get compressed, and I'm not really trying to do a ton of compression. I'm just trying to do a little bit of sound growth. And then from there, I hit this this Esoteric Audio Research 825 EQ, which is an amazing EQ. And again, I'm really just doing some large sound shaping. You know, a lot of times I'm not using it right now, but I'll just boost every single frequency band. I'll sort of use the 4 bands to cover the full frequency spectrum from like 60 or 100 down to 240, 1K, 6K, and 20K or 20K. And all I'm really trying to do is add just a little bit more kind of like friendly gain. So I come out of there with a little bit of heat, and then from there I go into the Alan Smart C1. And there is where I might do a tiny bit more compression, maybe another 2 or 3 dB of compression. And I'm using this gain makeup to get the basic level that I want to hit at my stereo soundtrack with, which is usually about 3 or 4 dB below maximum zero, because from there I'm going to go to a mastering engineer who knows a lot more than I do and let him take the last shot at it, because I love collaborating and I love having that last step with my favorite mastering engineers. I use Gavin Lerson and Pat Sullivan. They're my 2 favorite mastering engineers depending on the album, and I go there and I finish things off. The rest of the gear, my Neves, when I do a drum kit, I still use my Neves from my basic drum setup, you know, kick, snare, hat, toms, and overheads. I try to keep it pretty simple. If I need to go with more mics than that, I have these 2 here, and I have another set of these, and you know, a ton of other preamps that I could bring in if I want. But basically, for my little overdub room, which I have a small overdub room, you know, 8 mics is pretty much all I'm ever going to use. So I pretty much have it covered. And then these 2, these Summit compressors, I just use it if I'm doing vocals or guitars and I'm recording and I want a tiny bit of compression, or again, just sort of some gain control. I'll put it through there just as another kind of stop in the pathway, keeping it very, very simple. And you know, from the days, in my old days where I used to use a ton of analog gear, this is sort of what I'm down to when I'm working in here in my room, which is primarily a mix room. But when I do overdubs, I try to keep it pretty simple. I do a lot more stuff in the box. There's so many great plugins now. There's so much great sound making that you can do with plugins that I do a ton of that. I still use some outboard reverb. I have my 6 Bricastis. I guess people know that I sort of embrace the Bricasti sound pretty well, and I got 6 of those puppies, and I still have a bunch of 480s and 960s. But I use a ton of plug-in reverbs, and most of the compression and EQ I do now, I do in the box, simply because, well, first, it sounds really great. You know, now it's no compromise at all, in my opinion. This one guy's opinion. Yeah, I'm not compromising anything anymore. And the flexibility of the recallability of it. So when I do use analog gear, what I do is I set it to one setting and then I don't change it for a project. And that way, when I need to recall stuff, which I'm constantly doing, you know, this mixing is no longer linear. You know, it's no longer start a piece, then finish a piece, then start the next piece and finish the next piece. Basically, you mix, you put it away, you mix something else, you put it away, you come back to it, you build your sound, and then you start playing it for the people that you need to get approval from. So that's the way I like to work now, and I think that's one of the beauties of modern, you know, music making, is the fact that you can really sort of build your house and then go back in and repaint the walls and stuff like that. So that's really it. I mean, it's a pretty simple space. You know, on the walls, instead of putting up gold records and awards, I'm not really that comfortable with that stuff. I have the scores from some of the films I've worked on. This was The Last Samurai, and it was signed by the star of the movie, Ken Watanabe. And then over here I have the score from Tron, which is signed by the Daft Punk guys. And then that one is Gladiator, signed by Ridley Scott. And then this over here is I worked for many years, who's sort of my musical mentor and my musical father, Herb Alpert, and that's a painting that he painted. And when I built the room, he offered me, he said, if you got a spot for me, I got a painting for you, and he gave me that painting. And other than that, you know, I do have a little bit of memorabilia, some baubles, you know, a couple of Grammys, which are nice, and a couple of awards, and my constant love for Miles Davis. If you look around, there's lots of stuff about Miles there, lots of stuff about jazz. It's sort of where I grew up and how I started getting into music. And that's really it. That's the life of Alan in Studio M. So thanks very much, and keep listening.